Just a few days ago, between February 5th and 9th, 2026, the Supreme Court of Norway held hearings to determine whether the state should continue granting subsidies, that is, financial support, to Jehovah's Witnesses, and whether it should maintain their registration as a religious association. Here I need to clarify something. The Norwegian state provides financial support to all registered religions in the country, not just Jehovah's Witnesses. And yes, I also know that many Jehovah's Witnesses, those who don't really know their own religion very well, claim that they do not receive money from any government controlled by Satan the devil. It seems those witnesses haven't been paying attention to what their own website says. On March 27, 2025, they celebrated a legal victory they had at the time, and in doing so, they explicitly acknowledged that they had been receiving money from the Norwegian state. But why did Norway stop giving Jehovah's Witnesses the financial support it had provided for decades? Basically, the state argues that it is against Norwegian law to fund, with taxpayers' money, religious activities that violate human rights. By this, they are referring to the ostracism, social exclusion, practiced by Jehovah's Witnesses toward those who are expelled, and even toward those who are not expelled but voluntarily leave the religion after having been baptized witnesses. The latter are known as disassociated people. So, the hearings held from February 5th to 9th were covered by Norwegian media, as well as by groups of former witnesses, who were even granted permission to live-stream the hearings online. In this video, I will tell you what arguments Jehovah's Witnesses presented to defend their case. But more importantly, I will show you the legal maneuvers they used to confuse the judges. So let's begin. First, it's necessary to give you a bit of context. On January 1st, 2021, the Norwegian state enacted a new Religious Communities Act that made state subsidies, in other words, money, conditional upon religious communities complying with the protection of their members' human rights. That same year, for the first time, the Norwegian state denied financial support to Jehovah's Witnesses and later also revoked their registration as a religion. Now, of course, the Watchtower's legal team sprang into action. And in 2022, their attitude was basically, over our dead bodies before we lose that money. So they sued the Norwegian state. At the first level of litigation, on March 4th, 2024, Jehovah's Witnesses suffered a major setback when the court ruled in favor of the Norwegian state. But interestingly, right when they were backed into a corner and on the verge of losing the Norwegian funding for good, the governing body suddenly realized something. It turns out they discovered that 2 John, verses 10 and 11, the very verses they had long used to justify refusing even to greet expelled or disassociated individuals, applied only to those who had become apostates. Well, imagine that. After reading that passage over and over for decades, they just happened to notice this detail right when the money was about to disappear. But let's not be cynical. I'm sure it was Jehovah's guidance. And so they released the August 2024 study edition of the Watchtower, where they allowed members to greet expelled and disassociated individuals. They also took the opportunity to say that an occasional phone call to invite them to meetings would be acceptable. But let's not get carried away. The Watchtower made it clear that socializing with them was still strictly forbidden. And something else happened, also purely by coincidence, of course. That infamous video disappeared from their website. You remember the one, a disfellowshipped young woman repeatedly calling her Jehovah's Witness parents on the phone, again and again, and they, being loyal to Watchtower, to Jehovah, refused to answer. Meanwhile, the young woman breaks down in tears each time her parents ignore her call, until finally, she gives in, not to emotional blackmail, of course, but to the loving discipline of her parents and of Jehovah, and returns to the congregation. But yes, the disappearance of that video was completely coincidental. Don't even think it had anything to do with removing incriminating evidence in order to strengthen their appeal and possibly recover their precious funding. Of course not. Wink, wink. In any case, the witnesses appealed the ruling. And as a result of all these strategic maneuvers, in March 2025, the appellate court informed them that they had won. Naturally, the Norwegian state saw right through the legal gymnastics and filed an appeal before the Supreme Court of Norway. And that brings us to the hearings held just a few days ago, between February 5th and 9th, 2026. Although the hearings have concluded, no final ruling has yet been issued. The Supreme Court is expected to deliver its verdict in the coming weeks. Now, I want to make something clear. With this video, my intention is not to determine who is legally right. I am not a lawyer, I don't claim to be one, and I certainly am not an expert in Norwegian law. However, as someone who was once a Jehovah's Witness and served as a congregation elder, I can evaluate what the witnesses' defense team said and determine whether their arguments align with their actual doctrine and practice, or whether they misrepresented the facts or relied on legal maneuvering to mislead the judges. And that is exactly what I intend to do. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, leave a like, share it with someone who might benefit from it, and subscribe if you haven't already. You can also join the channel membership. Besides supporting my work, you'll get access to special content where I can speak more openly about sensitive topics. Click the link I've left in the description. Let's continue. A very common argument Jehovah's Witnesses use in these kinds of court cases, and one they used again in the hearings we're talking about, is that Jehovah's Witnesses are not required to cut off social contact with those who have been expelled or who have disassociated. They claimed it is a matter of conscience, and that therefore each witness is free to decide whether or not to cut off social contact with expelled and disassociated individuals. What the witnesses' defense said here is a blatant lie. The Elders' textbook, Shepherd the Flock of God, in its most recent version, in Appendix A, where it lists the grounds for expulsion, says the following in items 21 and 22 under the subheading Brazen Conduct: unnecessary association with persons who have been removed from the congregation or who have disassociated themselves. There is a difference between simply greeting a person who has been removed from the congregation or who has disassociated himself and socializing with him. A committee should be formed if, despite repeated counsel, an individual willfully and continually engages in unnecessary association with a non-relative who has been removed from the congregation or who has disassociated himself. A committee should be formed if, despite repeated counsel, an individual persists in associating with a relative who is promoting apostate teachings or wrong conduct. It is clear that you can indeed be expelled for associating with someone who has been removed from the congregation or who has disassociated, and in certain specific cases, even if that person is your own relative. Therefore, this is not a matter of conscience. It is mandatory, which means the Jehovah's Witness attorney blatantly lied. Another tactic the organization's lawyers have used in other legal cases, and one they repeatedly used in the Norway case, is to claim that when someone is removed from the congregation or disassociates, family bonds are not broken. What the attorney is doing here is using a specific situation to try to confuse the judges. It was only when one of the judges, better informed, asked whether the same applied to relatives who did not live in the same household that the Watchtower attorney had to admit, after dodging the question several times and clearly frustrating the judge, that when family members live in separate homes, the instruction is to avoid socializing with the removed or disassociated relative. But if the judge had not done his homework and had been uninformed, the impression left in the courtroom would have been that expulsion never, under any circumstances, affects family relationships. In fact, the Elders' textbook states in Chapter 5, Paragraph 17, that elders or ministerial servants may be removed from their responsibilities if they allow an adult family member who has been removed from the congregation or has disassociated to continue living in their home. It is worth mentioning that on the final day of the hearing, Soraya Neres was present. She has shared her testimony in various media outlets about how, when her father saw on Facebook a photo of her standing next to a Christmas tree, he told her he would never speak to her again. And that Jehovah's Witness father has kept his word. All of us who were once Jehovah's Witnesses know that this man is simply obeying what his religion instructs him to do. The attorney's argumentative maneuver is crystal clear. Another false statement the defense made during the hearings was this: if you're not satisfied, you just say you're leaving, and that's it. Nothing happens. There's no coercion to stay. If that were really the case, then why are there so many PIMOs? For those unfamiliar with the term, PIMO is an English acronym that stands for physically in, mentally out. It refers to people who remain physically inside the organization, essentially by force, because they do not want to lose their family ties, friendships, employment, and so on, but who are mentally out. That is, they no longer believe what the organization teaches. This is what we mean when we say people are not truly free to leave whenever they want. By claiming otherwise, the witnesses' lawyers once again blatantly misrepresented reality. They also misrepresented the situation when they said that children do not face pressure to get baptized. Once again, I will quote from Shepherd the Flock of God, chapter 5, paragraph 3, points 1 and 2, where it explains that in order for someone to be appointed as an elder or ministerial servant, the body of elders must first review his spirituality and that of his family before making a recommendation. In practical terms, this means that if a man aspiring to one of these positions, which among Jehovah's Witnesses is considered a significant goal, has children old enough to be baptized, and for witnesses, that can mean as young as 10 or 12, and those children have not been baptized, he can pretty much forget about being appointed. Obviously, the parents will be encouraging their child to get baptized. Now, no reasonably intelligent witness parent is going to openly threaten punishment for not getting baptized, although I can assure you some have done exactly that. More often, they will constantly be encouraging their children to take that step. Let's be honest, some children of Jehovah's Witnesses have gotten baptized just to earn their parents' approval, or simply so their parents will stop encouraging them all the time. And of course, when other kids their age have already been baptized and they haven't, you can be sure someone will say, "Look, so-and-so already got baptized, so when are you?" Can anyone honestly say, with a clear conscience, that there is no pressure on children of Jehovah's Witnesses to get baptized? Other statements the witness's attorney made, less sensational perhaps, but equally important, include, for example, the claim that Jehovah's Witnesses do not expel minors, and that he was not aware of a single case in which that had ever happened. However, Shepherd the Flock of God states the following in chapter 7, paragraph 30. If the minor persists in a wrong course despite the assistance offered by two elders and his witness parent or parents, a committee will meet with the minor and his witness parent or parents. If the minor is unrepentant, he should be removed from the congregation. Clearly, that was yet another false statement from the attorney. He also claimed that Jehovah's Witnesses do not monitor or investigate the lives of their members, which, at best, is only partially true. Let's be honest. Every Jehovah's Witness is taught that if they see another witness engaging in any conduct that could lead to expulsion, they are obligated to report it to the elders. Once the elders are informed, they are required to assign two elders to investigate the matter and determine whether or not a judicial committee should be formed. Another false claim from the attorney. So, there is no doubt. The Jehovah's Witness attorneys lied repeatedly before the Supreme Court of Norway. Did they manage to deceive the judges? That's something we'll find out in the coming weeks. By the way, would you like to hear about the case in which a judge sanctioned the Watchtower's chief attorney in the United States for blatantly lying in a very sensitive matter? Click the link in the upper right corner. See you next time.